Welcome to this first lesson in this mini-series that's designed to fast-track your learning of the Python programming language by creating an exciting and a complete project, in this case, a dating program. Now, if you haven't done any programming at all, I would suggest Test and Track's 0 to Pro 4-lesson series to do first. But it is possible you could just follow along regardless. So as we code, we'll point out each of the constructs, explain each concept so that you can learn as we go along. Now, the context here is a dating program. If you're watching this, you may be single, maybe a student in a relationship, maybe you're married. Either way, we were all single once, and this whole concept of dating is very relatable. You've probably heard of sites like Match.com, eHarmony. How do they work? First of all, a user visits the site. They decide they want to register, which means putting in their details, which are stored in a file. Now, when they log back in, that's when the magic happens. It's important to remember that in this series of lessons, we're not going to be working on the front end. It's not going to be visual. However, we're working on the behind-the-scenes logic and the programming, and that's where the cleverness and the power lies. Now, many sites, including eHarmony, they claim that they have sophisticated technology, programming, secret algorithms that help you match with the perfect person or your dream man or woman, your soulmate. And we're going to add a little feature of our own, which works on an interesting principle. So just before we start coding, I want you to stop for a minute. Just imagine that you've met someone. You're sitting across them, maybe in a park, maybe at dinner, and you want to find out everything about them. Now, not the best things, but the worst things. That's the stuff you really want to know. Are they crazy? Are they going to drive you crazy? But you can't obviously just ask them, what are your worst qualities? That's not going to go down very well on a first date. So what if you could ask them just one question that would magically reveal their greatest weaknesses to you? Remember, it can't be, what are your greatest weaknesses? What do you think that question could be? Watch this space, because when we start coding, particularly the registration screen in a few minutes, I'll reveal to you what that question is, and you could ask it to anyone. Now, when I speak about a problem, I don't mean a problem in the sense I've got a pain in my knee and that's a problem, or I wish I had more meaning in my life and that's a problem. In this context, we really mean problems that need solving using programming. So here on the screen are a couple of examples of problems. When you're given a small problem, like 2 + 2, you just know the answer's 4. The bigger the problem comes the need to break the problem down into its little components or parts. This is called decomposition. It's an extremely important part of any development. You can use flowcharts, you can use pseudocode to break your problem down and to plan it and design it. This is not a design series, but I would suggest that you look these things up, because when you start making a program and actually building a project, you will have to design it first. When we made Test and Track, it might look simple to use, but it took a lot of planning and design. For instance, there's different components. There's a teacher dashboard, there's a student dashboard, and each dashboard has different modules and different parts to it, which we had to plan and think about. The same way, dating system, and we're going to simplify it and abstract it. That word abstraction means getting rid of the irrelevant details for now and just focusing on what's important. So in the green on the right-hand side, I've broken down the problem into its component parts. And the first 3 are the parts that we're going to be dealing with in this lesson, making a main menu, a register screen. This is a system overview showing all the tasks. You can pause the screen here to look at the flow and what's going to be happening for the main menu, the registration, for the login. So that's a more visual view of what we're going to be doing. Another way of thinking about this is to break into parts each section that you're doing into inputs, processes, and output. This is hugely important and actually very useful in programming. So for any different little bit of programming that you're doing, ask yourself, what's going in? Those are the inputs, like the name, the last name. What do you need to process? That's the clever bit, the programming. And finally, what's coming out? This is the input, process, and output screen for the login screen. And as I just showed you for the registration screen. And here is the actual code. Now, if you feel confident, you can just go ahead, pause the screen, and copy this code out to get it to work. So this is the main menu. This is the register screen. And finally, this is the login screen. You can also download the PowerPoint and hit play to look through the code and pause it as you wish. But I would highly recommend it that you went along with me as I go through it now step by step and code it as we go along. So let's get started with some coding. Now you can do this in idle, you can download Python, you can use trinket.io. I'm going to use Replit. If you are using Replit, make sure you've signed up for an account and then you log back in. Once you log back into Replit, you'll see a whole bunch of different options down here in the left-hand side menu. My Replit shows you all the old Replits that you've made. I'm just going to say new Replit, Python, create Replit. Now the way Replit works is it gives you an automatic name. I'd suggest that you just change that name to something meaningful, call it dating. That's it, you've got dating system part 1. Let's start. Now, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to make our main menu. And we do that by typing def, which means define, create a subroutine, sometimes called functions, even though that means something different. So we're going to call them subroutines for now. So def main menu, I've got a main menu subroutine. Don't forget these open brackets, close brackets, and colon. And notice what happens here. As soon as I do that, it indents position inside this subroutine. If I type something here, in other words, if I type something outside the main menu subroutine, system or something like that, I try to run this program. I'm going to, down here, I'm going to type in main menu, open brackets, close brackets, which means I'm calling subroutine. Nothing happens. And it says indentation error. And the reason for that is that in Python, indentation means something. It actually has a meaning. And the meaning is to do with belonging. In other words, if you know that this statement here belongs inside this subroutine, it needs to be indented. You can press the tab, or you can use 4 spaces. It's just easiest really just to make sure. Tab is probably the most consistent. So tab is found under the escape, just column keyboard. You need to make sure that everything you're doing in subroutines is indented. Now I would recommend that you did this as you go along with me, so you can see each line work. I'm calling this main menu. Now if I put that in here, this call is now inside this subroutine and nothing's going to work again. You do need to make sure that that is all the way down the left-hand side, outside of this function, or on the same level function, not inside it. We got a perfectly working beginning. It says, welcome to the dating system. So now I'm going to go ahead, and remember you're doing it in the same line as this print, the indentation. I'm going to write while true. This is a type of loop, and inside this I'm going to create our main menu. Now the print statement basically allows you to print things to the screen, like how I've just done there. Welcome to dating system. And you can use single quotations, print something simple like that. That's just going on forever. Let's just stop that, because it's within this loop. And this is basically a while loop, which is saying keep doing this until we break out of it. But you can also use triple quotations, so 3 speech marks at the end. Whatever you put inside this print now, with these 3 speech marks on either end, will be printed to the screen. I'm going to add some stars. I'm going to call it main menu. I'm going to say something like find the love of your life. I'm going to have 3 options. Right. So if I now press run, you can see it says syntax error, and that's probably because I have 4 speech marks at the end instead. Great, now you can see this is repeating itself. I don't want it to do that. I would like some sort of sensible thing to happen, such as for me to press 1 and then I go to the registration screen. So let's get going with that. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable. And remember, you're still on the same line as the print, indented perfectly. You don't want to do it there because it's going to confuse everything. So I'm going to make a variable. I can call it x, I can call it choice, I'm going to call it x for now. The variable is like a memory location into which you store a value. I'm going to ask the user to put in value, which is going to be a choice. Remember, the user can put in 1, 2, 3. Now, I'm going to have some selection. So this is an example of selection, which is the use of an if statement. If x is equal to 1, and note I'm using a double equal sign here, which is the syntax in Python, colon, and everything inside an if statement is also indented. If x is equal to 1, I'd like you to take me to the register function. We haven't made it yet, so don't worry. And then break out of the loop so it doesn't keep on going on forever. Else, if, and that's what the elif stands for, if x is equal to 2, well, oops, x is equal to 2, then I would like you to go to the login function. And then finally, if x is equal to 3, I would like you to print by then, and also break out of the loop. Let's have a look. Now, you can see that these things don't work here, and they're causing an error. So I'm going to quickly make a register function. Say print register. I'm going to say login. And you don't need these little dots. I'm just doing it to make it look a bit slightly more pretty. And there we are. Now, if I run the program, again, this is really handy. It tells me where the mistakes have been made. So I can see that line 17, there's a mistake. And the break is outside the loop. Remember, the loop starts on this indentation level here. And the break, it's saying, is outside the loop, which it doesn't understand. I'm going to leave that for now, and we'll go back to these. And run the program again. And again, you can see that it's just repeating itself. So see if you can pause the screen and figure out what's going on. This is a loop which is asking you to repeat whatever is in it again and again. And hopefully, as you're looking at the screen, you can just about see this whole block of code here on the same line as the while loop. And we don't want it there, because we want this block of code to be inside this loop, to be repeated forever inside the loop. So the reason I'm showing you this is because it's so easy to make mistakes like this, and then you just feel like giving up. So I'm going to take this whole block, press tab, and you can now see that this is inside, not on the same line as the while loop, but it's inside the while loop. And if I now press 1, nothing particularly happens, it just goes back, and you'll see why in a minute. And if I press 2, it's not going to the login function. And why is that? So at the moment, over here, x is equal to input enter choice. This x is storing a value, and that value is a text or string value. It's not being recognized as an integer. So what I could do is I could just say int, open brackets, close brackets, around the x. And what this does basically is it turns the integer, the x variable into an integer. It's a process called casting. I could do the same thing here. I'm like casting a spell on it. If you watch the first Zero to Pro lessons, this will make much more sense, and it's explained in great detail. So I do that, and if I now press 2, you see it takes me to the login screen, but then it comes back here. I don't want it to come back here. If I press 1, it takes me to the register screen, but it brings me back to the main menu because it's still in this loop. Now, when it takes me to the register screen, I would like it to break out of the loop. Do the same thing. The login, same thing. Quit function. So let's see what happens now. 1 takes me to the register screen. There's nothing in it yet. 2 takes me to the login screen. Perfect. 3 quits the program and says good. This is great. So I have now got my main menu system set up. Now that we have a main menu, we need to move on to the registration screen, the login. And obviously you can't log in without registering because there's nothing to log in with. I think we're going to start by making this little program here, this subroutine. Let's fill it in. It says register. Let's get back into it, make sure we're on the same indentation level, we're inside it, and we're going to say something like just make it slightly so you can see it. And that's great. So that's not doing anything hugely exciting. It's just saying if you type in register, it goes to this. It says, first things first, tell us about you. So this is where it gets really interesting. We need to actually take some information from the user. We need to store it in a file. So think about the information that you want from it. You can customize this or change it, or just follow along for now for simplicity. Say enter first name. Always the same format. Last name is the variable, first name is the variable, and you're inputting a value, a string value in this case. And then we're going to do something really clever. We want the username to be automatically generated. So I want the username to be based on the first name. If their username was Joe, if their first name was Joe, and their last name was Blogs, I'd like their username to be something like Joe B member. So I'm going to use their first name plus their last name, but watch what I'm doing here. I'm going to put in a 0. What's that's doing? Giving me the first, because it always, when you're counting along in programming in Python, you always count starting with 0, the first letter, the last name, and you'll see what this means and how it looks in a minute. And actually I'm going to do something else. I'm going to say plus dash. And you'll see what this looks like. This is creating using a thing called string manipulation. Okay. A username and automatically generating it. I tend to switch between different languages, and I'm remembering that a comment in Python, also remember we talked about like the triple speech marks, but you can also just have a hash. Comment is not part of the program, it's just a reminder of itself. Right, so I've got that there, and that is going to automatically generate our username. So I can print it to the screen, and I can say your generated username is, let's just test, so I'm going to type comma username. Now it's a good idea, like I said, not to try and type out everything before you know it works. Let's see if it does work. I'm going to run, stop, run, and sometimes Replit can be extremely buggy, so I'm just going to copy that and refresh the screen. Always copy and paste it or make a copy of it. You lose everything. So now I type in register, I put in my first name, which is Joe, Blogs, and look, it generates a username for me. Joe B, based on what you've done. You can change that. You could change this to find you wanted the second letter, the last name, or you could play around with that for some fun. So we've got an automatically generated username. Now we would like the password. Of course, they need a password, login. They would need their gender, and I'm just going to keep it simple here. Gender. And then you could have their email, of course they'd need. Their date of birth. You can't have dots in a variable, so try and do that, but date of birth. You can specify a format like date, month, year. And what other things? You might want their beliefs, for instance. So whatever you want to call the variable. And this is the bit where we're going to have the interesting question. Now remember, in the beginning of the video, I mentioned that you could ask one question to someone, which would reveal everything to you about their weaknesses. And that question is actually, what are your strengths? That's very interesting to note that often with human beings, our strengths are directly linked to our weaknesses. The people who are patient and have weaknesses associated with patience. People who are very laid back, kind, issues with maybe authoritative, being able to be assertive, or leadership, etc. What we're going to do here, and I want you to be thinking about your own superior algorithm, is we're going to have a strengths list. And we're going to slyly ask our users to tell us what their strengths are from this list. We're going to have a whole bunch of things like patience, efficiency. Yet we have a list here, which is being created inside these square brackets. Sensitivity, frankness. Now, you notice I'm making, in the list, I'm making each thing that you choose sort of a corresponding or a counterpart, the next one. So patient, you might be patient, then you might suffer with not so efficient. You might be very sensitive, actually, then you might not be very frank, or the other way around. If you're frank, you might struggle with sensitivity. I'm developing this huge list here, and you can think of other things because I'm just submissiveness. Well, if you're very submissive, it's a great quality, but you might not be terribly good at leadership. Maybe you're very, very good at timekeeping. Actually, you find people who are laid back, they have the opposite skill to you there. Laid back and perhaps not so good at time. So we've made a list and we want to print this list for the user to see as they're registering. At the moment, we've got a whole bunch of errors. See, so I put in Joe logs that, and then it stops there. It says strengths list is not defined, and you can see the reason for that is I've spelt it wrong. So little things like that, quite important. And these, don't worry about the curly braces, it's just that they're not particular yet. That's going to work in a minute. Now, we're going to ask the user, we're going to declare a variable called strengths, and we're going to say input from the list above, enter your top strength. In case they don't know, they select from the list. And now, this is the bit where we need to actually write this to a file. So remember, when someone registers, we don't want to just lose all that information. We want to store it so the next time they come in and try to register, they can pick up where they left off. And in order to do that, we need to use something called a comma-separated value file. So at the top, I'm going to type in import CSV, which allows us to work with comma-separated. And down here, right at the top, before we start asking them information, I'm going to open file. Now, the clever thing about this, typing it out like this, is if it doesn't exist, you'll see what happens. I'm going to open the file in what's called append mode. And that means we can, as people add registration information, they can just keep appending, which means adding to. There's different modes. There's like read mode, write, etc. I'm going to say append, FO, which is sort of, you can imagine it standing for file out. Right? Now, remember, all of this needs to happen inside this command. So I'm going to highlight all of that, tab it to show that it's inside. So I've got with open, dating text in append mode. Another thing I need there is index indented inside is writer is equal to CSV writer, because we're going to be writing stuff file. And again, now this bit, just keep a little space there. So right at the end, now that we've got that set up, we can use our writer that we set up here, which is drawing on this library, right? CSV.writer. So I'm going to say writer.write row. Someone is registered and they've got a row of information, and I would like to write all of these fields that they've just put in. So username, password, gender, email, job, beliefs, and their strengths. I would like to write all of that to file. And then if it's been done, say you have registered or something nice like that. Now, let's have a look at what happens. If I press run, first of all, it gives me a syntax error in line 31, which is great. So let's have a look at what's going on there. It's saying invalid syntax. So writer equals CSV dot writer full. It's missing that there. I'm going to register. I'm going to put in my first name. It's generated a username for me. I'm now going to put in my password, mail, Boggs's email. That his date of birth is that, and he's going to pick patience. That's his top strength. Now, if you were very observant, you probably saw that on the right-hand side, by magic, a file has appeared. It's called dating.txt. That's what we called it. Dating.txt. It's appeared, and it has written a row of information, which is basically our information for our new member. It's got the username, followed by the password, gender, etc. Now, it might have been nice also to have the name and the first name, and the reason it's not been written because I didn't write it. I could just go back here and say that would mess things up a little bit. It's there, but if you see that now, I don't want to go through the whole to something quick. This is not validated, and we'll talk about validation, so just doing it. And you can see now it has actually written everything. So my first name, my last name, my username, etc. So that's great. And you could change the format in which you want things written. For instance, maybe I want it to be a username and password, which is kind of simpler to see, then first name and last name, and then everything else. It's great. So again, I go back to your main file. You've got your program. So we have now created the registration screen. We're ready to move on. Now this is the fun bit where everything comes together. We've got our registration screen and we would like now the user to be able to log in. So we've got a login, it'll print to log in there, and we're going to add another loop, a while loop, and we're going to actually create a Boolean variable called not logged in. Set it to true. And all this means is we're going to use it to tell us if the user is logged in or not, and if they're not, we can break out of the loop. So then I'm going to say while, this is a type of loop, the row series, while not logged in is equal to true. In other words, this is the condition to meet. And if this is true, keep doing everything that's inside this loop. Open the file, dating.txt. Replit is, it's funny, the dating.txt, but this time we're logging in. We're not actually writing anything or appending anything. We're opening the file in the read mode. So as f, this file. We're opening the file in the read mode. And we need a double equal sign there. And then we're going to say, ask the user, this is the login screen, remember, their username. We're going to ask the user for their password, and they can't just enter anything. They have to enter what they registered with. So we're going to have to open a reader, CSV reader, file that we've referred to over here, that as file, F, right? And we're going to say something, this is called a for loop now. We've used different types of iteration, a while loop, which is here, and a for loop, which is a different type of loop. And we're going to say for row in reader. So remember, this file is what is being read. So for each row in the reader, and for each field, and that means each individual thing, like a name or a last name or ID or etc. For field in the row, if any single field, like the first one, the second one, the third one, equals to username, and we're doing this quite simply, what the username that they put in, and now watch what I'm doing here, and this will make sense in a minute. Say row 1 is equal to the password. Suddenly we want that Boolean variable not logged in to become false. We are logged in now, and something will happen there. Break out of the loop. But else, and remember the if and the else are always on the same line there. If else, I want to break out, and I might want to, same line of the for here, I might say if not logged in is equal to true. Say something, try again. They haven't logged in successfully. Else, access granted, let the dating begin. Right, so let us have a look at, remember you need a double equal sign there, at how all of this works and if it works. Because we don't have any data in this, I'm going to have to register again. So if I register, remember sometimes Replit needs a bit of a hard refresh. Do that. Booting Replit. I've copied the file in case I lose everything. and you display. If I register and I put in with Joe Bloggs again, passwords open123, and he's a patient person, so patients. It says written to file, and you can see it's been written. Now, when he logs back in, so if I run that program again, if I just type in anything, it's going to say try again, because it is looking up this file, and there's only one user there. I'm going to have to type in the username, which happens to be Joe B member, and I'm going to have to type in what I've specified, which is, in this case, I go down here, row 1. What is that? Now, if you think of this file here, the 1D array, and again, I'd recommend you going back to the lesson on lists or arrays before you do this. I can explain it quite simply here. 1D array is, you can think of it as a list, and remember in computer science we always start by counting with 0 first. So that's a 0, that's a 1, a 2, this element is a 3, that's a 4, 6, 7, 8. And what I'm trying to say is that in the login screen, if a field is equal to the username, so any of the fields is equal to what they put in, and the password is correct as well, and that's the one up. It's row 1, as you can see there, which is why I've said row 1. Then let them in. So if I type in Joe number open123, it says access granted, let the dating begin. Now if I made a mistake here and I typed in row 3, go back to our row, that's not looking up the password, it's looking up the last name. So if I now tried to type in row B, actually Joe capital, so let's start again. Row B. I typed in open123, it wouldn't work actually, even if I typed it. It wouldn't work, but it would work if I typed in, because I've adapted the code to this name. So that's not correct. Password happens to be that which is 1 in the array. So that's useful to remember. And this is going to come up a lot as you're coding, and it's a very important stand. So that's a 1D array. In the next lesson, subsequent lessons, you'll be looking at 2D arrays. What happens when you have lots of different members? How do you look up? If I just added a couple of people to see if this does work. If I tried to log in, typed Ruth with her password 123, does work. Looking up all of the fields. Here's part of this. His password happens to be B123, again access granted. So you've now done a login screen. Do analyze this, look at what you've done. You could think about different fields that you could add if you can think of something more interesting. This is a really basic example given. I'm sure you can think of me. One of the things we're going to do is we're going to use this list here to find a perfect match based on complementary strengths, weaknesses. Keep that in mind, thinking about something, maybe a superior algorithm. We've got our main menu, register screen, the login screen. So in the next lesson, we're going to be creating a profile for our Joe Bloggs or whoever the user is. We're also going to be making a search menu within the profile so that Joe Bloggs could start dating. He could start waving at people. He could search for people via the search menu in the profile, looking at different criteria. So that's lots to look forward to. See you in the next lesson.